Hello, fabulous Falcon family. This is your favorite librarian. I hope, Mr. Canberra, the librarian at Hurst, and I wanted to take a minute and talk to you about graphic novels. Graphic novels are probably the most popular part of any young library today. And for some people, that's not a problem. But for some people, that feels a little concerning because there's so many pictures and so fewer words, and it feels like your kids aren't reading a real book. They are the thing that I find most parents say, "Hey, I'd like my kids to get a real book." Now, I wanted to talk about that for a few different reasons. One, I want to give you a little bit of information about graphic novels, and two, I want to talk about what constitutes a real book. So, first of all, as a librarian, one of the things that we really try and stress is that all books are real books and all reading is real reading. And we do that for a bunch of reasons. Number one is because what we most want to do is to get kids to feel like their reading is valid. Because if they're being told that the books that they like are not real books, that may guide them to just not like reading. Okay? And these books can often be a great on ramp to reading the kinds of books that you ultimately want them to read. It's kind of a safe place for them, especially if they're transitioning from picture books as a younger kid into longer books. It doesn't feel as daunting to open a book with a lot of pictures, even if there's actually quite a bit of text, quite a bit of information, some higher level thinking, some, and in some cases, real history being taught. So let's talk about what comic books are and aren't, what graphic novels are and aren't, and that kind of thing. So when you think graphic novels, most people think, oh, that's like comic books. And there's some validity to that. Comic books are individual single issues. Think like Superman, Batman, but there's also comic books that are like Mickey Mouse and Disney and that kind of stuff. Okay, so those are single issues. Now, about every 6 or 7 issues, those will often come out in a paperback form, collected together, and we just call those collected editions or trade paperbacks. You might see that abbreviated as TPB. So those are collected versions of multiple individual issues. Okay. They may also come out in hardback versions as well. And the hardback version is usually a little bit bigger than the trade paperback. And so, what's great about that is that the artwork's a little bit bigger. You get to see it a little bit better. And then sometimes you might see those come out in a really big version, a big doorstop of a version that's, sometimes up to 1,000, 1,200 pages. And those are called omnibus, an omnibus. And I believe the plural of omnibus is omnibi. But so you have an omnibus that's, in that case, it's often like a whole run of that comic book. It could be multiple months, sometimes half a year of that comic book collected in one big hardbound edition. Okay. So that's all with just comic books, right? So we have comic books, trade paperbacks, collected editions, hardcovers, omnibi, right? When most of the graphic novels that we're dealing with, when we talk about graphic novel, a graphic novel is a novel, meaning it's a whole literary work combined in one volume, sometimes multiple volumes, but it's typically not what we think of when we're talking about individual issues being collected together. Okay, so let's talk about some of these different things. Let's go into it a little bit. So, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, one of our most popular series, is this a graphic novel? No, this is not a graphic novel. This is what would be just considered an illustrated novel. And just to show you an example, there are illustrations throughout the novel, and there's quite a bit. Some pages look a little bit more comic booky, but it is still just considered an illustrated novel. Now, another one of our more popular series, Dogman, and Cat Kid's a part of that. These are what would be considered more of a graphic novel. Now, this is a graphic novel series, and my graphic novels in my library all have the graphic novel sticker on them. So, again, one way to differentiate between whether your kid has an illustrated novel or a graphic novel is, does it have that sticker? Okay. So that's what we would traditionally think of as illustrated novels and graphic novels. Now, graphic novels can also be adaptations of real works. So, for instance, Coraline. Some of you may be familiar with the animated movie Coraline. This is a graphic novel adaptation of the novel. And you can see This Coraline looks nothing like the movie, because that was Leica's interpretation of the literary work Coraline, and this is someone else's. This is someone else's interpretation of what Coraline looks like in graphic novel format, and this is adapted and illustrated by P. Greg Russell. But you can also have, in graphic novels, you can have nonfiction. So, for instance, this is The Great American Dust Bowl. This is a nonfiction historical work teaching about the Great American Dust Bowl. And it's actually history, and this was a award winner when it came out. So we have historical graphic novels as well. We have a lot of graphic novel series that are very popular. So Dogman and Cat Kid would be one of those. What's it called? Babysitter's Club. You know, my generation, even before us, grew up reading those Babysitter's Club chapter books. And now those are a very popular graphic novel series that were originally adapted by Raina Telgemeier and now being adapted by other people as well. So those are really popular. So there's a lot of great graphic novels. Now, what's the value of graphic novels? You know, why are we keeping them? Why aren't we just making kids read chapter books like, you know, we had to when I was younger? Well, what we've found is that, one, graphic novels do some things that chapter books don't always do as well as graphic novels. Graphic novels and comic books can secretly work to really increase your students' vocabulary. I have a comic strip. I'm in my office right now. There's a door right here. I have a comic strip on the outside of my door that was written and illustrated by Jerry Craft. Jerry Craft is the award-winning author and illustrator of the New Kid graphic novel series. And in it, he talks about one of the things that was so great about comic books for him and graphic novels is that it increased his vocabulary. If you think about Marvel Comics, right? We know all these Marvel movies, but those Marvel comic titles were named things like The Spectacular Spider-Man, The Invincible Iron Man. And so if you're 8 years old and you're reading these comic books, these are words that you're maybe not as familiar with, and they introduce you to that kind of vocabulary. The man who created many of those Marvel characters, Stan Lee, was known for using a word, Excelsior. That's definitely a word that most people wouldn't know, but it showed up in the letters to the editor in those comic books. So you had some access to that. So they're increasing your vocabulary. They're also causing you to have to kind of look at these pictures and interpret those pictures in the context of the story. Many of you would say, oh, well, the pictures are just telling the story, so you don't even need to read the words. And to be fair, there are certainly some kids that when they read comic books and graphic novels, they're kind of flipping through, they're looking at the pictures, they're not reading the words. But a lot of them, if not most of them, are doing both, because both of those things tell the story. But learning to look at a picture and interpret it in the context of the words is very valuable. Think about things like political cartoons. Now, obviously, we don't want like our 7-year-olds, you know, sitting reading political cartoons all the time. I think we all could maybe do with a little less politics sometimes, right? But the when you get to junior high and high school, you're having to interpret political cartoons as part of the state standards, and they show up on the AP test. I can remember when I taught at LD Bell High School, we had teachers that were giving their students political cartoons to interpret, and there would be, you know, 2 different political cartoons on the same topic, and they had to look at that and sort of interpret it. Reading graphic novels and comic books is a great tool to do just that. Now, I took a quick moment and I paused the video because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss any of these really great things to highlight about why graphic novels are so valuable in our real books. Now, if you go to the Hurst Hills Library website, there's a link at the top called Advocacy, and it takes you to pages where it discusses how these things are important. There's an infographic there that came from the Iowa Public Library that talks about how graphic novels are real books, and here's some of the things that it says. Graphic novels teach visual literacy, the ability to interpret information presented in the form of an image. Visual, and I'm quoting directly from it, visual imagery is necessary to navigate today a digital world and is essential skill in the 21st century workplace. Think about how much is visual now when we're talking about videos and images being a part of everything that we do, right? Brain development, they build neural pathways. They take in both image and text at once and synthesize them to determine meaning. So we're building neural pathways, which means we're developing young brains. Okay, verbal literacy, development of language and communication skills. One, we already talked about vocabulary, but in addition to that, we actually see interactions between characters in a more visual way. So we're learning about how characters talk to one another, which teaches us how we can talk to other people. So there's a social aspect of that as well. And then finally, motivation. It's an enthusiasm. It drives enthusiasm. It makes people want to pick up those graphic novels and read. I tell you, when I've got all my graphic novels here, I have 6 full shelves and a cart of overflow that it can't fit on. But they're so popular that once the kids start checking out graphic novels, that condenses down to about 3.5 shelves with no cart. That's how many graphic novels are checked out all the time, all year long here in the library. So I think graphic novels are something that are not going away. We certainly encourage kids to read these as well as chapter books. We want them to pick up those chapter books, including the big fantasy series and the great historical fiction novels and all of that. We want them to read it all. We want them to read diversely and widely. But graphic novels are a tool to open that door, and they're the best tool for building enthusiastic readers. So anyway, I hope this hasn't gone on too long, but I just wanted to share with you why graphic novels are a great tool for your student and why we encourage kids to check them out in the library.